Well, hello and welcome everybody. And I'm joined this afternoon by an old friend of mine called Derek Arden. Some of you have come across him before. Yes, Derek, good afternoon. Because actually we've done various talks together. And in fact, actually we've had a bit of a career together as well. We both worked at Barclays for our sins. And he was in a star in the corporate division and I wasn't. And anyway, as like all good people who work in a place like Barclays, you learn from it and go on and progress. And I have to say what Derek did was went on and actually developed himself in terms of an area I really wouldn't have expected at all, because he knew all about business, he could read a balance sheet, understood how companies behaved. But what I never really understood was actually he was really looking at the individuals in the companies and how they behaved. And that's what he went on to focus. And I found it quite astonishing over the years. This is a man who's focused on one key area and has written various books about it, which I have to say have been very successful, on how to negotiate. All those things which we all wish we had known years ago. And when he explains it through, you think, actually, that's stunningly obvious. I only wish I'd paid more attention to him earlier. Anyway, so Derek, good afternoon. Welcome to, and I'm afraid you've got Betty with me as well this afternoon. If I try and get Betty off my shoulder, there's going to be a howling cat for the next half an hour. So it's going to be all three of us just talking here. So Derek, welcome and thank you. Look, after your career at Barclays, what made you focus on negotiation?
Justin, thanks so much for inviting me. I was passionate about negotiation because I was responsible for the retail sector in Barclays, and I got thrown out of Tesco's in 30 seconds for not reducing my price on a £1 million contract. And that day was a really wake up for me, because I was sitting on Cheshunt Station, which is an awful place in North London, thinking how was I going to explain to the chairman of Barclays that I'd lost a Tesco account. And therefore I went that night and bought my first book on negotiations. And at that time I was 38, Justin, so I should have read the book on negotiations. And on the way home, I decided as I was reading it that I didn't know about the tactics, the psychology of the tactics, reading the body language. I hadn't done enough preparation. I hadn't asked enough questions, which are all key components of negotiating. And I've always been passionate about people skills, meeting people, curious about where they were coming from. So I started studying it. I started teaching it. And when I left Barclays, I decided to set up my own little business, advising people on negotiating. I'm proud to say I've written 12 books, Winwin's behind me.
Yeah.
And it's been great. It's been a great journey.
I mean, 12 books, that's an awful lot of books on one subject. But what amazed me though was actually, first of all, you focused on this. You could have stayed within Barclays and just made a star of yourself there, being their chief negotiator. But you had the courage of your convictions at a time when, Barclays was reasonably well paid, had share option schemes, all those sort of things, to actually say, no, that's it, turn me back on that. I'm now going to try and do something myself. And this is before the fashion fad of everybody going off and becoming a consultant. You went off into the brave new world on your own to do it. What led you to that? Was it an anger or frustration with Barclays, or just a personality?
I think I got to my early 50s, Justin, and I was fed up with being told what to do by people I didn't necessarily respect. And I don't think that was a criticism of Barclays. I think it was everywhere. If you weren't going to get to the top, and I wasn't, you're going to be the third layer down. You're being pushed around. You're being hassled. You're working on a Sunday. Frankly, I had enough of that. I wanted to be in control of my own life. And in fact, one of the things I say to people is you've got to negotiate with yourself before you negotiate with anyone else. You've got to work out what you want to do, what quality of life you want. And I wanted a lifestyle business. And as I was teaching negotiation, as you'd expect, I negotiated a pretty good deal out of Barclays to be able to let me relax and get on with what I was passionate about. And I'm passionate about teaching people about interpersonal skills.
Well, I noticed as well, because one of the areas you also focused on was the Public Speaking Association, to actually try and encourage other people to understand how to go about public speaking. I mean, it's always terrified living daylights out of me. You've always been very complimentary to me about it, but I have to say, I have had to learn from others, because to me, it's not a natural place to be in, but you made it look, well, you get on stage and you do make it your own. You link with the audience immediately. They warm to you. And it's something which I didn't realize you had that great strength and skill. Was it in you, or did you teach yourself?
Oh, I learnt it. I learnt it. I learnt it in Barclays. I had to do a fair bit of speaking in Barclays, and I got involved in training in Barclays, and that was much more motivational than being the account director for Tesco's. I can tell you, nothing against Tesco's, but teaching people, helping them. That's what it's all about, and that's what I do now. So. I did learn. I took myself off to Harvard after I left Barclays. I took myself to join the Professional Speaking Association. I wanted to see what others did. I
Hang
modeled.
on, how do you take yourself off to Harvard? I mean, I take myself off to go shopping in Tesco's. I don't just wander off to Harvard.
I applied to go on the Advanced Strategic Negotiation course and Dealing with Difficult People course, run by the famous guru Bill Urey. They accepted me, probably because the fee was very large. It probably wasn't because of my credentials. And I went off for a week. It was only a week. It sounds very grand, but it was a very intense week in Harvard in Boston. My wife was sitting by the pool while I was jollying around with these very intense people. 200 of us. What a course that was! 200 people in the hotel at Harvard, the Marriott,
and presumably in quite a competitive spirit as well in those sort of atmospheres, isn't it?
Very competitive. There are only 2 Brits on the course, actually. I remember the other guy well. He was seriously aggressive. I think he worked for Yorkshire Water and very ambitious. It's stuck in my mind. Most of them were Americans. Americans negotiate in a different way to Brits.
What's the difference?
Little bit less win-win, really. A little bit more, let's get on with this. I need to get more out of this deal than you do. I call it the John Wayne style of negotiating, actually, but it's not quite as aggressive as John Wayne, but it is. I need to win more than you.
You mentioned win-win, and I know that's the book behind you there. But what's the point of the win-win? I know you can't sum it up immediately, but just give us a flavour of what that actually means.
Well, we've known each other for a long time. We've had a few disagreements when we were working in Barclays, of course, but we've always remained friends and colleagues, haven't we? And that's what it's all about. A win for me, but a win for you as well. You need to feel comfortable with the deal that we do. We shake hands, and I need to feel comfortable. But sometimes I talk about a win-win-win, Justin, which is really what it's all about. A win for me, a win for you, but a win for our ongoing business relationship, so that we stay in touch, we stay friends, we introduce people to each other, we do each other favors. And at the end of the day, if we get into a difficult situation between us, frankly, we can sort it out over a glass of wine or a beer.
I've always seen the Americans as being, they're always held up as the great negotiators, the great business people, the people coming in with their 10-gallon hats and we're going to do this deal, and all sorts of rather rude phrases that go with it. Is that really the case?
No, not really. It's more of that macho. Certainly up to the 80s, all the books that were written around the world on negotiation were mainly written by the Americans, and they were mainly hardball negotiations. Then Harvard did this Harvard negotiation project, which was all about, if we behave like this to other people in the world that have got nuclear weapons, then it's going to be a real lose-lose and no one's going to win at all. And so they kind of worked out how they were going to get the Israelis and the Palestinians to talk to each other, because there was huge issues going on there, as we know. So that's what they did, and that's what the book, the first book on negotiation was all around, written by Fisher and Urey, called Getting to Yes. It's on my bookshelf. I studied it like mad. I don't think it's a good book for Brits to read because it is very American, and it's 30 years out of date.
And that came directly out of the political issue, because that was a remarkable deal that was done, almost thought to be impossible at the time. But you put that down to people thinking carefully how to negotiate to reach an agreement.
Well, there's some stories that came out of that, and one that's a big learning point for all of us was that frankly, they had to spend 6 months negotiating the food that was going to be served, thinking about the Arabs and the Israelis, where it was going to be held, what size of table they were going to have, what the status was going to be of the different people at the negotiations. And basically, they spent a lot of time getting the Americans to think, you've got to think as the Arabs think here. The Israelis have got to think as the Arabs think. And the American people from Harvard facilitated the whole thing. And, it was back to, you need to put yourself in the other people's shoes. What's the biggest issue for them? Is it saving face, as it often is with people in the Middle East, etc.? So it was all about put yourself in the other person's shoes.
And Derek, that's the key issue you've often said to me. You don't think about yourself, think about them.
Yeah.
And I have to say, every time I normally manage to remember this after I've managed to do some rather bad negotiation. Your comments come to mind. I need a sort of clipboard in front of me to saying, all right, here is Derek's tips. Remember these things. It's one of those things I think we need some regular sort of practice on, in terms of just to make sure we've got the skills and someone to actually, coach you, teach, and put it into your own language and give you the confidence of doing so. One of the things that I'm really interested in, if you don't mind doing, Derek, is that over the next few months, I think there are a series of areas we can talk about. And some of the companies we're trying to bring through onto regionally, companies we're trying to make them investable. That's a bit patronizing because some are already, but quite a lot of growing businesses, good boys and girls, they've done really well. They need to get to the next stage. But they're all very different. They sometimes speak with a different language. And of course, there's a different generation coming through now who really do have a different language, different systems they're using. How do we adjust and change? How do we make sure we just don't turn into old farts?
Well, I think we have to listen to them really carefully. I mean, we know that millennials think very differently, even to Gen X and Gen Y, in the 80s and 90s. So millennials won't be bossed about. They won't be told what to do. They're their own people. And if they get into a company which has got a real hierarchy, if they're smart, they'll just leave. They'll just disappear. So there's a whole different thing going on then. Justin, I've just put the phone down from a construction company where I'm helping them negotiate an insurance claim. They're having all sorts of issues with the insurance company. And what we're doing is putting ourselves in the shoes of the insurance company. I'm helping them with the preparation. They haven't done enough preparation. The lawyer seems to be wanting to go to court. They're paying a barrister as well. And I'm saying we need to get to mediation. We need to sort this out. It's costing you, I think it's cost my client about £200,000 in lawyers and barristers' fees. And the other thing I was going to say very quickly, I've just come back from Durham University Law School, where I've been talking to the students. The students got hold of me. They persuaded me to go up there on Tuesday evening. They poured plenty of beer down me, which was great. And we had 50 students in the law school, and I was teaching them negotiation. So, but I learned a lot on Tuesday, and I had to put myself a bit more in their shoes. Next time I do it, I'll think more carefully. I thought probably I was talking to 30-year-olds and I was talking to 20-year-olds, and I think it's
right. Now look, we're coming out of a strange time. We have the pandemic still with us. Hopefully it's withering, but it's still there. Business has changed. We've learned to communicate in different ways, using more Zoom and things like that. Has that fundamentally changed the rules for negotiation, or do we just adjust accordingly?
No, it hasn't changed the rules at all. We do need to think about when we're negotiating on Zoom. So I've got a number of rules there, which probably I can just about got time to share with you on the time clock. Number one is make sure you organise the Zoom call. Then you're in charge of all the switches. You can be there early and you can be all prepared. Number two is you might want to record it. Now, you need permission to record it. You need the other side. But if you initiate the Zoom call, you've got the recording and you can play back what they said to you in case you're not sure. Number three is you should also always take a time out and a break to think it through. And number four is you should have somebody with you looking at the Zoom call, because as we've discussed many times before, when you're in the jungle negotiating on your own, you don't always see the lions creeping up behind you, and the person that's watching the video can keep an eye on that. And it's a bit like when we go to a sports game, we don't always see what they print in the paper the next day, so everyone's got a different perception and a different view.
So in that sort of circumstance, though, you're doing a Zoom call, your chum next to you is waving at you saying, look, we need a timeout here, we need a break. Does that mean you actually have to stop the Zoom call, have an excuse, have a reason, come back again in half an hour, or reset the day?
Yes, absolutely right. And then you call them. You go into another room and you call them. I don't know if you remember that course, that case Amanda Staveley against Barclays last year, when they hadn't switched the Zoom off, and the lawyer from some flashy law firm down in London said, I don't trust that bitch an inch, and everyone was listening to that, and they had to apologise to the judge, hoping it wouldn't affect the outcome of the negotiation. Hugely embarrassing. So you can make mistakes like that. You need to switch it off, go into another room, make a phone call to your colleague and say, what do you think? how much do you think we have to reduce the price to close this deal? And usually, Justin, when people take a time out, they don't have to don't have to bring the price down as much as they think, because the other person won't be under that emotional pressure you are when you're talking to someone direct and it's your business. So that's a massive tip for your clients.
That's great. Now, look, we've got obviously links with corporate advisors, corporate partners, as well as obviously the investee companies themselves who actually want to have be invested in, and of course investors. I would really like to get some groups of these together, so they understand that's how the negotiation skills work, and they're not being legged over. They're actually just sort of understanding how you go about it. For, as you say, win-win. Everybody gets something out of it at the end, not going away thinking, well, I've actually just stolen a march on that one. I'd really love to be able to try and actually put that. Is that something we do as a sort of as a simple course? Is that something we do as a series of lectures, or what's the best way of managing that?
Well, I was thinking there was three things we could do. We could do these sort of 10-minute, 15-minute sessions between you and I once a month or every other month, just as a taster. We could, I assume we're going to get back to face-to-face conferences. I did my first one this week. So I could talk at a conference. I could do a breakout session if you had a conference, or we could run a course. The biggest problem with courses is that business people think they know how to negotiate. So you have to get them over that hump, because they know how to negotiate. Of course they do. But do they know the psychology? Do they get pushed down? Do they get, played up like Tesco's did to me, like all the big retailers and this thing? So that's what we'd focus on. We'd have a quarter of an hour on the fundamentals. Then we get into the psychology of the tactics, the haggling, the conflict management, and reading body language is something. It's 5 times more difficult to lie with body language. So that's what we should do. But we need to make it short, sharp, and succinct, because people are so short of time these days.
Absolutely. Well, what I think I would really benefit from is actually having take the names off and actually go through a case study of what you did, what the problems were, what you addressed, what went right, what went wrong, and what happened at the end of it, so that people can actually sit there and say, I get that, that's my world, or actually my business is slightly different, but at least it gives them a model they can work with. And I think we can actually make that in such a way which is actually, heaven forbid, even entertaining for people.
Well, we could do the whole course on case studies, actually, to be honest. And on my YouTube channel, if anyone's interested, I negotiated on behalf of Oxfam with a major bank, and I got them £200,000 off their bank charges, mainly credit cards and the cash that comes out of the shops. And that is actually on my YouTube channel live, because it's not a secret. But we could do that. We could just look at case studies and just pull out the learning points. And
what's interesting with us, because our businesses, they're not startups generally working with, they're growth businesses. And so they're often run by a dynamic team looking to really focus on getting growth, but not necessarily understanding how a bigger company should work without necessarily falling into the traps of the large corporations. So there's one area there I think that they would really benefit from. But I think one of the areas as well, these corporate advisors, often they're solicitors and accountants, as well as having some corporate experience as well. But they've often just learned from what's happened in the past, and they just carried on doing the same thing. I think we need to try and bring them into the next stage of saying, right, the world has changed, technology is changing, the style of companies which you're dealing with now are very different from what they were a few years back. You need to re-educate yourself. And I think there's a space there for that as well. I have to say, in the businesses that I've helped start, I wish I'd had that knowledge beforehand. And more to the point, as the business developed, I needed updates, and someone to whisper in my ear and say, Justin, that's not really the right way of going about it.
That's what I do for the clients that I work with, that get to know me, trust me, and then we speak kind of 24/7 really, because I can usually give them a quick answer to things in 2 or 3 minutes. I spoke at an accountants conference, Justin, in Sofia in Bulgaria. It was one of these networked. And I did a little poll question, and the poll question was, how many of you believe that you are good negotiators? And the only 38% of them said that they were good negotiators. And I was thinking, crikey, I wouldn't want my accountant negotiating a really important deal for me if if that was the case. And it's a fairly similar figure for solicitors, believe it or not. They'd never admit that, because a solicitor has to be, you know, a really good, tough negotiator, really. But yeah, so I think we should do that, and I'm up for it. I'm up for it if you are.
Fantastic. I think we should do that. Now, let me just finish up by saying, here we are coming out of COVID. Could you give me 3 things I can go away with and say, these are the points that whether you're an investee, an investor, whether you're an advisor, or just one of our strategic partners, here are some 3 tips for you negotiating in this environment.
I've got to say preparation is the number 1 tip. People don't prepare, and it's
okay. But preparing what? What am I going to look at? I mean,
this is what I call it, getting the drains up. So looking at every area, doing proper due diligence, and asking the right questions. People do due diligence, but don't ask the right questions. That's a ridiculous case in America at the moment, isn't it, called Bad Blood, with that woman that had this machine. And they're all going into court saying, well, we did due diligence. We did 100 hours of due diligence, but no one tested the machine. She didn't let people test the machine. So I really mean, and when I say get the drains up, you go and look. And when people are buying something, let's take a pub, for example. Go and stand outside the pub. You need for 3 or 4 hours on different days and see how many people really go into it. You don't want to believe the numbers and what people say. Look on LinkedIn. Mind map. I'm a serial mind mapper. I've got a mind map here somewhere, but because you get all the facts down on one piece of paper. So that's number 1. Number 2 is ask really good questions and listen really carefully to the answers you get. My favorite question in banking was, how are we going to get repaid? Simple as that. And then shut up and listen.
So always asking the obvious.
Absolutely. The best questions are the most simple ones. Tell me what the issues are. How are we going to get repaid? How can we resolve this? What do you think we should do next? And they're all very short questions. And then you shut up. Most people keep talking. You shut up and you listen. You watch the body language and everything else. And number 3 is, there are some slippery people out there that you can't trust. And therefore you do need to understand the psychology of negotiating tactics, the tactics they're going to do, like this deal. If we don't sign this deal by 5 o'clock, then the deal's off. I've got another person ready to sign, but because I like you so much, Justin, as long as you sign today, we've got a deal. You know, as soon as you're put under those kind of time pressures, psychological pressures, so they need to be understood. And in my book, Winwin, 35 of them I've listed so that I could think of when I was on 35 tactics. I mean, a lot of them were, you know, people downright lies, but then you've got to spot lies.
Yeah. And it's just your body language. I think it's really important, because it's fascinating just going through the tics, the nerves that people have. And I never know how to interpret them, but I've seen some fantastic examples of people who really have been shown up as being utter charlatans just by how they behaved. They sounded great, but when you then looked at it, you suddenly realized actually there were clues there and I missed them.
Well, if I give you an example, if you ask me a question, this is absolutely true, Derek, and I move back.
Yeah.
Moving back means I'm uncomfortable already with our relationship and what I'm saying, and I fold my arms defensively. Defending my heart, because that's why we fold our arms. And I rub my nose, Pinocchio's nose told, and I say, yep, Justin, absolutely the truth. But the interesting thing is, even when I role play that with people, they don't spot it. They're still studying the spreadsheets and the Excels and the hockey stick sales line and all that. They don't spot the fact that, you know, it's all fiction. So, you know, it's really...
This is fascinating. Those are 3 really good ideas. Right, okay, we're going to sit down and we'll discuss our plan as to where we take this next stage. And I hope anybody watching this, please get in contact with us, because we want some ideas. Derek's book, Winwin, I have to say, is a great read on this, because it's not technical, it's practical, and some good ideas which you just take that with you when you're going to a meeting, and you find yourself in a better position, probably a better position when you're trying to hold a Burmese cat whilst filming. Anyway, Derek, good to speak to you again. We'll catch up very soon, and thanks a lot for that.
Justin, absolute pleasure, and we'll talk soon. And if anyone wants to get in touch,